Or good evening to all of you out there. Jane, turn your camera on, my friend. You need to click the button.
There I am.
There she is. Wonderful. All right. Welcome everybody to the inaugural, the first ever, the premiere of the Software Delivery Leadership Forum. It's an open and online interactive discussion on topics related to Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Bell.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren. And today's topic is, well, basically whatever business you're in, humans are at the heart of it. In today's fast-changing world, and boy, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's changing very fast because I've been sitting in the same place for the last month, but it is. What types of skills are most in demand, and where can we invest to keep the humans in DevOps at the top of the game? We've got a great set of panelists today, and we're going to have a conversation first with Jane, but we'll discuss things like the findings from the 2020 EDOSR survey, learn what types of skills are most in demand, pragmatic approaches to hiring and upskilling an increasingly distributed team, connecting IT with a business to gain better alignment via mutual understanding. I promise it's going to be a lot more interesting than it sounds when I read it off a piece of paper.
I should just insert the word puppy somewhere in the middle of that, and then you just read it out loud like a teleprompter. Like what's that Will Ferrell movie? Wonderful. All right, well, we do have a fantastic set of speakers joining us, a really diverse set of perspectives and opinions. The first half hour here is going to be our friend Jane Grohl, CEO of the DevOps Institute. She'll be walking through the findings of her survey. And for the last hour of our event here, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience to talk about the survey or to talk about some of the other topics that are related to it. So without any further ado, Jane, let's go through the house rules and make sure that folks who are out there understand. Again, this is a brand new thing that we're trying. We want to make this for the listeners. The whole idea of the Software Delivery Leadership Forum is to make something that's more engaging. COVID-19 has really upset a lot of on-premise and physical interaction at events where communication happens. Personally, the hallway track at the events is my favorite track. And so having the conversations and being able to ask the questions and being able to ask stupid questions is an important part of the conference going experience. And I know I'm excessively good at asking stupid questions, but we want people during these events, we want folks to be able to ask questions. The chat is available. The questions tab in GoToWebinar is available. We ask that you be respectful with your questions and your comments. We will be putting those questions and comments out to our panelists during the second half of the second 3/4 or the 2/3, I should use the correct math, of the event. So put your questions and your comments in the chat or the questions and we will get to them. Without any further ado, I'll kick it over to Jane to talk a little bit about upskilling and the findings from the 2020 Enterprise DevOps Skills Report.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks so much. And I'm really excited to be here today with this esteemed panel. So many different perspectives and experiences. And I think particularly today when we're all facing a major paradigm shift in terms of how we work. Certainly, we don't know what the new normal is, but I think one thing that's become really clear in this horrible, horrible situation is that the unsung heroes of the pandemic is really the IT talent force, right? So certainly with great respect for healthcare workers, first responders, those who are on the front line. But if anything, I think that this horrible situation has really illustrated the fact that the need to transform is no longer really as optional, and that agility takes on a whole new meaning when many organizations have had to pivot very quickly from the way they used to work than the way they work now. So we're going to spend about the next 30 minutes looking at essential skills in the new decade. And of course, this decade got off to a terrible yet shifting start. And so I think when we conceived the survey back in 2019, nobody expected this, but hopefully the data that you're going to hear from me today, supplemented by the amazing insight of the panelists, will give you some ideas in terms of how you individually and how your enterprise can start to move forward. So if you're not familiar with the DevOps Institute, our mission is to advance the human elements of DevOps. And we do that by equipping humans all around the world with what we call SKIL, skills, knowledge, ideas, and learning. And as a result of that, research like the Upskilling report, we accredit and orchestrate certifications. We don't do any direct training. We have events. I'll share with a little bit about that at the end. But the main goal is to connect a very large global community for which we know human advocacy and human transformation is as, if not more important than digital transformation. So if you're not a member of DevOps Institute, it's free. Go up to our website at www.devopsinstitute.com, become a member. There's some really amazing assets available to you as a member and more coming. So I'll be able to tell you a little more about that as we go forward. So a little bit about the genesis of the Upskilling report, and Sam knows this pretty well. So back in 2018, I ran into a good friend of mine, Evelyn Orlick, who formerly was a vice president, industry analyst at Forrester, and said, hey, we have an idea for doing a different kind of research report. We know skills transformation is really critical, but which skills? There's so many skills facing practitioners and enterprises today. How do you know which skills are considered must-have, nice-to-have, and not as important? And I had a kind of fateful breakfast with Sam Fell, then of Electric Cloud, now of CloudBees, and said, I have an idea. And very grateful to CloudBees and Sam for supporting us second year in a row. And the reason the second year is so important is that we had some amazing insight in the 2019 report, but we now have year-over-year data. And the response from the community has been fantastic. So the data you're going to see was analyzed based on a very extensive global survey. We had just under 1,300 respondents, all different layers of the organization, ranging from the C-suite, the management layer, and the individual practitioners. Ironically, half of the respondents self-identified as development, half self-identified as operations. I leave it up to you to figure out what that means and where security lives and other aspects. But we feel really confident that the data is validated and that what we're giving you is sound data based on data sciences. So, let's take a look at what the community told us. Well, first of all, I think really interestingly, 52% of this year's respondents said the journey is difficult. And I don't think that's a huge surprise for anyone. But what was surprising, it was almost equally difficult in the people, process, and technology segment. So when you look at DevOps and all of the things that DevOps encompasses, we know that there's a very strong people component. Certainly, we understand that process is important for intelligent automation, and process, of course, is executed and conceived by humans, and that the technology piece is equally difficult as the people and the process piece. And I think going back a few years ago, we might have seen automation kind of taking, the front spot, but the difficulty really does cover all three layers of what we'll call the DevOps stack. So also interestingly is the race for the DevOps human is on. And now again, remember this data was collected pre-pandemic, and it's even horrible to say that out loud, right? Pre-pandemic, but back in 2019, and the survey ran for about 4 months, ending in December. So again, just to give you a little bit of context, 52% of the respondents said they were either recruiting or planning to recruit within 12 months. And we know that there's a huge talent gap, right? We know that the shelf life of skills is expiring faster than ever before. And we know that it is humans that are going to fill that skills gap. But if you look at it as 52%, more than half of the respondents said that they're either currently recruiting or planning to recruit. That's really telling in terms of the state of enterprise IT. It's really telling in the face of, where do we fit from a global perspective, right? That talent needs are everywhere. And I think that really feeds some of the other things that I'm going to share with you today. So when we looked at
not to stick like weird things into the mix here, but I'm pretty sure that the data on this has been affected pretty dramatically by COVID. And I would ask the folks out in the audience, if you go back to that last slide, ask the folks who are in the audience, ask the folks who are in the audience if this sort of looks like you, or if it looked like you 6 months ago, how has that changed, right? I've seen a lot of companies in the Bay Area specifically that are hiring quite a bit. It's not impacting them at all. Amazon hiring, what, 170,000 people or something to be able to man all the things that get us the stuff that we need. So it's interesting to think about how that pandemic is affecting even the numbers that we have from not so long ago.
You know, and Sam, just to feed on that, yeah, and again, just my perspective, I can't back this up with any data from the report, but we've seen organizations have to pivot technically very, very quickly, right? Oftentimes in a day or two, from the way they were working to the way they are working now, and the technical undertones, right? What underpins that pivot, isn't just, hey, let's all get on, collaborative meeting tools. It's how do you manage security? How do you manage capacity, right? How, are you an on-prem environment? Are you a cloud environment? And I think it is going to accelerate some of the skills that we're going to see really bubble up when we do the survey this year in terms of, okay, what did we learn, right, in this situation? And really, where is that skills gap in my organization? So I think you're right. And for those listening, I hope those are questions that you're looking to pose to our panel, because our panel is so 360 degrees that I think we're going to be able to get some really good discussion going. Thanks, Sam.
Sure.
So when we talk about this need for for upskilling, what was also really fascinating out of the data is really only about 31% of the respondents said they had a formal upskilling program, and another 20% said that they were developing a program. And there's some, in the news, you see Amazon, you see FedEx, you see others that are actively promoting their upskilling programs, but we also have 38% that said they don't have a formal upskilling program. Now, again, I wonder if that's going to change, and whether it's upskilling, cross-skilling, and under the current situation, maybe it's reskilling, right? So we know unemployment is going to be very high. My hope is that we get to reskill some really competent people so that they can enjoy some of the benefits of working in the technology space as well. But 38% currently only having an upskilling program, it was a little bit scary, right? Considering the fact that the move to digital transformation is not new. I think many are early in their journeys, and again, hopefully next year we'll start to see more of that, and that 38% who do not have a upskilling program will shift in the right direction. So I find this particularly fascinating, and for the panel, I hope we can really talk about this, because for the second year in a row, process skills, human skills, and automation skills are almost statistically equal in terms of their must-have importance. Now, we're going to take a look at which skills fall into each of those categories, but this year there was a very, very subtle change. Last year, automation skills was in the top role, again, by a very, very tiny little amount, but still it would have read automation skills, process skills, human skills, and human skills used to be known as soft skills. We just refuse to accept that interactive people skills are soft. So we've reframed it as human skills. This year, process skills and knowledge is in the top spot, again, by a little tiny margin, but still in the top spot. And so what is that telling us? It's telling us that process knowledge isn't necessarily a particular framework. It isn't necessarily Agile or ITIL or DevOps or anything along those lines, but the ability to understand process, to understand flow, right, is something that we're going to see really rise up in the data. So again, process, human, and automation skills. Now, to my mind, that makes a holistic human. We're now calling you hybrid humans, right? That the DevOps human has to be a hybrid of their process skills, of their human skills, right? Their interaction skills, and of course of their automation skills. And one is not necessarily more important than the other. As you saw with the journey, the parts of the journey that were difficult, equally people, process, and technology, and it's really proven out in the data. We're going to take a look at some functional skills as well, but again, people, process, automation really is exemplified by the response from our audience in terms of what are the top 3 must-have categories of skill.
And while we're on that slide, I'd love to just ask the audience, put something in the chat or in a question. If this is what you're seeing, if you're looking to hire people, or if you're looking to get hired, or if you're looking to upskill, what are the things that you're interested in? Does this jive with what you're saying? Again, we want to keep this interactive. I want to see comments. I want to see good chats. I'm seeing nice comments and things already, so keep it coming.
And, you know, just to feed on what you said, Sam, I think the other interesting thing is when we looked across 4 levels of respondent, from the C-suite to the management level. By the way, the management level, usually the hiring level, right? The individual contributor level and the contractor level, you know, there's some really interesting indicators here. Well, across the board, everybody agreed that process skills was you know, the most important, and there's very, very little differences between the layers. Again, you look at human skills, the individual contributor for the second year, I may be a little bit confused by that, but certainly when you look at the C-suite and you look at the management level, and remember, it's the management level that's likely going to be in the hiring role. You know, obviously very, very clear indicator here that your human skills will be as important as your process skills. And then again, we look at our automation skills, and there's some agreement, right? Again, statistical agreement in terms of the importance of that, with the management layer, you know, really standing out in terms of what those skills are. But unequivocally, human automation process skills really rose up. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at specific certifications or functional knowledge, knowledge around specific tools or business skills, the C-suite felt it was most important to have sound business skills, but the other layers, again, it's not that they didn't think it was important. They didn't think it was as important when they're assessing talent as the human automation and process skills. And again, for those of you listening, I'm really interested in your input. And for the panel, I think this is a really interesting topic to discuss. So let's look at human skills first, right? So the collaborative DevOps human is the human of the new decade. And again, particularly now when we have to work harder to collaborate because we may be in different situations, we may be in different work environments. I think we're all in different work environments, you know, and this is the one slide where we broke it out by region. And I think it was really fascinating to see North America, EMEA, and then global response all recognize that collaboration and cooperation are key, right? You have to be a good collaborator. Now, what does that mean? That means you have to respect other people's expertise. You have to ask for their opinions. You have to solicit their contributions, right? You have to work together well. And it isn't just on a interpersonal level, although you can see interpersonal skills are right there. Collaboration means that we combine our expertise, our talent, our respect, and there's inclusiveness. That's very key to collaboration and cooperation skills. And then kind of working our way down, yes, interpersonal skills, how you communicate to each other. Some of us think that we're great communicators, me included, and then I'm always surprised if somebody didn't kind of get my message or the intent of my message. And by the way, these are skills that you can learn. So there are areas that you can focus on. There's practice, certainly there's techniques, that if you feel that there's an area that you need to improve, this is not necessarily how you're born, right? These are skills that organizations need to invest in so that the DevOps collaborative human becomes something that's more the norm than more the outlier. I just want to focus on one other, and that's empathy. There's been a lot of focus on empathy, and I think that's a really key skill, because when you empathize, you put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You put yourself in their role. You see it from their perspective. And I think the DevOps Collaborative Human is going to need to focus on that. And certainly, I think the data has shown that to us 2 years in a row. So, you know, we talk about we talked a lot about servant leadership when we talk about Agile. Now we're talking about transformational servant leaders instead of directives, right? Where you need individuals that can inspire, that can lead, but also can serve, right? That they serve their teams, they serve their organizations, and they remove the impediments. They protect the team while at the same time they're inspiring them to move forward. And we want to create learning organizations. I think that's one of the core principles around DevOps, where everything is a learning opportunity. And again, you know, kind of going back to where we are today, the pervasive message is, while you're in a different work environment, learn something, right? Learn from your colleagues, learn from training, learn from, you know, experiences like this, but keep being a learning human, because a learning human becomes a collaborative human, right? And again, a lot of these human skills are teachable, right? But the best way to improve them is just to practice. Now let's go to functional skills. Again, interesting indicator from this year. Last year, security practices were in the 3rd spot in terms of must-have skills. This year in the 1st spot. You know, certainly the rise of DevSecOps, I think, has been driving that. But IT operations and IT infrastructure knowledge, again, for 2nd year in a row, are claiming those top spots. Now, remember, I said half of our respondents said they were developers or some type of a development role. And for the 2nd year, we've seen operations and infrastructure make a very, very strong showing in terms of must-have, with security really jumping ahead a few spaces. Now, again, you know, the differences are really small. You know, security and operations are fairly equal here, but that movement from 3rd, you know, up to 1st, I think, is pretty significant. And don't undervalue SDLC, right? Don't undervalue, you know, the delivery of software and how we do and how we manage that. I'm hoping we can talk about this on the panel today as well. And what does that mean? That means regardless of whether you think you're dev or ops or security or anywhere in between the 3, you're all of it, right? So you're now a hybrid you know, individual, but we want to create hybrid product teams, right? We don't want product teams that only have one competency or another. And I think the data is starting to bear that out, that you want members of your team that have some experience with this. And it's a movement away from this perception, perhaps, of a full stack engineer to a full stack team. Right. So if we're starting to create these hybrid product teams, you know, exemplified by this data, then that product team can have more self-organization, can extend the definition of agility. And so this team has to understand operations, certainly infrastructure, absolutely security, and also SDLC and testing and networking and disaster recovery, and there's some governance. So if you're looking at your organization, the data is telling us that the rise of the hybrid human, which then creates a hybrid team, is certainly, I think, an indicator here. Right? Hybrid teams, cross-functional, multi-skilled, right? We come from an organization of specialists, and now we want to, and I'll talk a little bit about T to E in just a second, and we want to understand customer value instead of being internally focused. So what do we celebrate? We celebrate what our customers are able to achieve, as opposed to the fact that we press the button and we got a deployment. Now, process, as I said, kind of edged ahead this year as being, you know, kind of the top must-have skills. And if you look at this, again, I think there's some really interesting insight. The top portion of process and framework skills is really non-framework specific, right? So source control models and flow, fairly equal. And I'll say it again, flow, right? So process is reflected in flow, right? So constraints are reflected in flow. And I think that when we start to look at process frameworks and process knowledge, there's SDLC again, right? So all of this really reflects on flow. And flow, when we look at value stream management, when we look at software delivery life cycles, when we look at happens pre-production, post-production, is certainly referenced there. And then the other part of this on the bottom half, and we saw this last year too, is supported by frameworks and methodologies like Agile or DevOps or ITIL. Interestingly enough, this year we saw a big rise in site reliability engineering. 5 points in terms of adoption of SRE, which was significant. And for the first time, we're also seeing value stream mapping making a showing as being a must-have skill. So there's definitely a trend forward in terms of adopting many of these DevOps practices and, of course, optimizing automation to go forward. So SRE adoption, as I said, really grew significantly. And some are saying, is it DevOps or SRE? The answer to that, I don't think, is one or the other. SRE is kind of the third part of the Agile DevOps SRE puzzle, in my opinion. But we are definitely seeing a stronger indication of interest, partially because SRE is a real role, so companies can hire that. Where Agile and DevOps adoption grew, not necessarily at the same pace as SRE. So I definitely think SRE is something that we need to pay attention to year over year. We don't have the same data on value stream mapping, but I said the fact that value stream mapping made a showing this year, I think is pretty significant as well. So then going back to technical, right? Technology shapes behavior. And again, a very subtle difference from last year to this year, where last year cloud outpaced every other skill category, right? So it was cloud, 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 cloud. And it's still very significant. And I think, based on what we're going to see coming out of the pandemic, is a lot more migration to the cloud to overcome some of the constraints, perhaps of on-prem. But CI/CD tool chains moved into the top must-have set of skills. And again, just from an interpretation perspective, my thought is you can have the cloud, but it's what do you do with the cloud, right? How do you manage the cloud? And certainly having continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous testing, continuous deployment in a cloud environment has certainly become very, very important for organizations. So not saying cloud skills isn't important. As you can see, it's very important. But CI/CD toolchain skills has this year emerged as probably the single most important set of technical skills. Which CI/CD tools? Again, we're going to have an interesting panel discussion about that, but understanding the concepts, the principles, and the practices around CI/CD is important. I feel it's important to also call out that APIs really gained a lot of attention this year. Some call it an API economy, and we definitely saw, while not as significant as cloud and CI/CD, it's there, right? So being able to operate in an interfaced environment, interoperable environment, I think really was demonstrated by the data. So just to wrap up, I have just a couple more minutes to go before we turn it over to the panel. Last year, we talked a lot about T-shaping, right? Where we wanted you as a DevOps human to supplement your deep competency, usually the way that you would have identified yourself. So I'm a developer, I'm a build engineer, I'm an automation architect, and that's your deep competency. And we advocated for your supplementing that with a broad range of other skills, not necessarily as deep as your core competency, but for example, if you're a developer, we want you to be a test-driven developer. We want you to groom your human skills. We certainly want you to groom your process skills, because that makes your deep competency better, right? So you have depth and breadth in a wide variety of different skills across the spectrum. Well, this year, we want you to evolve from T to E. And what does that mean? That based on the data and based on some of the research that Evelyn Orlick did in analyzing this report, really showed us that, first of all, your depth of skills should focus on your process knowledge, right? So certainly if you're a developer, you need to understand processes, not only your processes, but downstream processes as well, because we want to shift everything left. And you have to have competencies in automation and functional skills and technical skills. And the top of your T is going to focus very much on your human skills, right? Often how you'll win the day, whatever that means to you, is going to be reflected in your ability to work with others, because that enables flow. It also enables creativity and enables reliability. And so we know now that those skills are important. But part of the E is looking at your experiences, and you can only gain experiences through exploration, through execution, right? Being open-minded enough to be able to practice. And the third way of DevOps is you can't become a master if you don't practice. So while we still want you to be T-shaped and we still want you to have depth and breadth, humans are very complex. And we don't want you to be confused, right, by the data that we're presenting. Hopefully, based on who you are and what you do and who you work for, some of this data gives you an indicator. But you need to be a hybrid, right? You need to be a test-driven developer who knows how to build and secure and deploy and operate, right, your code. If you're a site reliability engineer, you need to be able to engineer operations for less toil, but you also need to know how to integrate with the development team. So we're not muddying the lines, but we do want you to be very rich in your skill sets. And we also want you to be curious so that you're a continuous learner. People make the biggest difference, right? So if I could sum any of this up, I said at the beginning, DevOps Institute, our mission is to advance the humans of DevOps. And it's never been clearer how important humans are to the equation, right? In the early days of DevOps, everything was focused on automation, and automation is essential. But you can't have good automation if you don't have smart people, engaged people, collaborative people. And it's individuals who are going to skill up. I could give you all this data. Everyone on our panel can give you advice on what to do, but we can't skill you up. You have to skill yourself up. But we can give you direction, we can give you guidance, and certainly your organizations can give you support because they need you, right? And again, never more than today, they need you. And I think we'll see an increase in the investment of upskilling, cross-skilling, and hopefully a market that gets reskilled as well. So if you have not downloaded the report, I'm happy to share with my colleagues on today's call that we've had just under 2,000 downloads of the report in less than 8 weeks. So, very gratified that the data is resonating. Please get your own copy. There's so much in this report that hopefully gives you as an individual some direction and your organization some ideas as well. And you can get the report from the DevOps Institute website. So before I turn it over to the panel, I do want to share that in support of the data that came out of Upskilling, DevOps Institute is doing a monthly series of micro-conferences known as Skill Up Days. And so the first one is next week, April 30th. We're going to focus on value stream management. In May, we're going to look at enterprise Kubernetes. Very grateful to our friends at CloudBees for sponsoring, and you'll have an opportunity to go to the exhibit hall and chat with other people and listen to some amazing speakers. So again, if you haven't had a chance to register for Skill Up Days, go to our website. It's free, and I think it's a pretty interactive experience. Okay, so on that, I know there's a bunch of people waiting in the wings, hopefully with some really good ideas and ready to answer some questions.
Holy cow. And so folks have seen I'm having some technical difficulties with GoToWebinar. Software is software, and I've discovered a bug that if you cut and paste from the chat window to try and repost it, GoToMeeting just pegs all your CPUs and dies. So don't do that, and especially don't do it twice, which is what I did. So I verified the bug, which is nice. But we're getting a ton of engagement from the audience, which is awesome. Talking about limitations with GoToWebinar, we can only have 6 cameras on So for the next part, I'm going to actually turn my camera off so that we can see the panelists who we really want to be seeing. And I'm going to ask them now if they would turn their cameras on. Robert is right on the stick, which is great. There's Ellen and Mitch and Anders. We need you back, and Jeffrey. And if you would go to the next
Sam,
slide.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see all of the webcams, okay?
Okay, yes, you can stop sharing your screen so that you can show the webcams. I will share my screen. I will make myself a presenter. Appreciate everybody's, oh, look at that, show my screen, lovely. Okay, very good.
There you go.
Can you see that? Yes?
Yep.
Yes.
Lovely. All right, very good. So, yeah, this is the first time we're trying this, so appreciate everybody's patience. I really love the engagement and the questions. Hopefully you've seen I'm trying to keep track of them and answer them as we go. We do have a fantastic panel. Jane mentioned it earlier. I mentioned it earlier as well, with lots of different perspectives. So regardless of if you're in the audience and your perspective is one of a hiring manager or one of someone who wants to be hired or someone who is looking to reskill or reskill a team, or if you're in HR and you have a whole company of people that you need to sort of worry about, the folks that we have on this panel today, I think, are going to have some really interesting insights. And so I'd like to have them each introduce themselves. I'm going to start on my left here with Mitch Ashley. Mitch, can you introduce yourself to the folks?
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm Mitch Ashley and CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. We're an analyst firm that focuses on DevOps, cloud native, digital transformation, and cybersecurity. Thank you for having me here.
Lovely. Well, thank you for being here. Rob Reeves, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Robert Reeves. I'm CTO and one of the co-founders at Datical, and we offer CI/CD and DevOps for the database.
Lovely. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Ellen Thorne, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ellen Thorne. I run the HR function for CloudBees. I've been with CloudBees for 2 years, actually 2 years. Next week is my anniversary. I joined with a mission to strengthen the employee experience. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I look forward to spending some time with all of you in the next hour.
Lovely. Thank you, Ellen. And last but not least, Jeff Weber, welcome.
Thanks, Sam. Jeff Weber, long career in technology, mostly in professional services and consulting. For the last 2+ years, I've been executive director for Robert Half Technology. And in that role, I help our organization globally, do a lot of the things that Jane went through, but it mostly helping individuals find, both productive contract and full-time roles in technology.
Excellent. Well, we are very happy to have all of you joining us to have this conversation. And Evelyn Orlick, who some of you saw it in the chat, she's the research director over at DevOps Institute. She has her own firm, Research in Action, ex-VP over at Forrester. She's also actually listening in and adding a lot of interesting comments. So I'm going to do my best to try and get those put out to you folks as well. But right now, let's go ahead and we're going to get started. And we didn't exactly know how to broach the subject. The subject's already come up, but we didn't want to ignore the elephant in the room. And so the idea of finding ourselves in this new normal, and I don't think we've even figured out what normal is yet. To be honest, I think we're just sort of in that transitionary period of understanding what the new rules of engagement of being alive look like. But it'll be interesting to think about how this, we talked about it already with the data and how the data from this past survey is obviously, the market's being affected by what's happening. It'll be interesting to see what the next set of data is going to show. And Jane, if I'm right, I believe you guys have already started work on the next generation of this survey. Is that accurate?
I was being so respectful by muting, and then I realized I was talking to myself. Yes, we are working on the 2021 survey, and our hope is to open the survey earlier this year. And again, trying to time it so that we really capture sort of the pre, during, and post paradigm shift that we're seeing.
Yep. So I guess I'll start with you, Jane. As far as the humans of DevOps in a COVID-19 world, I mean, do we want to talk about this slide as a slide, or we want to move forward into the other topics, the sort of the practical approaches to team upskilling, and then we can use the COVID as a backdrop to that?
Well,
Thanks,
and
Dan.
again, I'm no expert, right? I can only tell you what I see, and I can tell you what we've seen in the data. I'm really happy that Evelyn is listening in, because I think she can certainly add some perspective on that. COVID-19 has changed us a lot, but I think that we don't want everything to be about COVID-19. I think the data tells us a lot. I think there's some definite trends that probably are getting accelerated now. And you guys have heard me talk now for the last 40 minutes. So I think I would love other people to add their perspectives.
Awesome. All right, I will call out the next. Let's see, Robert, thoughts from you on COVID and upskilling, practical approaches.
It's not about the virus. It's about what happened after the virus became a pandemic. Are companies able to turn on a dime and react to that? And there are a lot of companies that have made investments in DevOps recently and over the past few years, and they have been killing it. I think if you look at the first bank that released, was able to take online applications for PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, was Bank of America. They had been investing in DevOps, training their folks, working very hard to take folks that are system administrators, move them to SREs, take DBAs, move them to the product team, not just database specialists. And they were able to get that out first, and they took a lot of that other stuff. But it isn't just the big folks. Certainly seen really good things from Zions Bank and what they've been delivering. They're not as big as Bank of America, but they're moving just as fast. So it's not limited to the size, it's limited to the skills. And have you made an investment? Now, it's not too late. Best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, second best time today. And so there will be another black swan. There will be another bad event, and it's up to you to upskill your people so that you can take advantage of it down the road.
Lovely, awesome. Jeff, you were nodding your head there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think what Robert just went through is exactly correct, and it's the idea that it's an acceleration of this. All those organizations that didn't do some investments are now faced with, what did they learn from this, right? A lot of people have done components of DevOps, but haven't invested in all the things that kind of Jane went through, which are the maturity and the upskilling and the processes and those things. And that's going to be some of the weakness. So I just think the learning out of all of this, and the quote, whatever new normal looks like, is everything, the flame has been lit in all the different component elements now. And we're just going to see a rapid race to figure out how not to have that black swan event, as Robert described, hit them, that we know is going to be in the future.
Lovely. Yeah, we're getting a ton of, I mean, it's just the questions and the chats are just lighting up, which is really, really wonderful. And I'm trying to find, there was a question. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of design thinking for the DevOps professionals? So if you want to try, this is from Jan, if you want to try and practically approach folks, what does that look like? The practical approaches to upskilling. How do you get design thinking? How do you help somebody grok that? Anyone? Bueller?
I'm happy to jump in, Sam. I think one of the principles behind design thinking is really thinking systemically about the experiences that end users, customers, people that are interacting with the systems and software that are being created. And oftentimes we compartmentalize based on skills or maybe workload, who's taking what piece. And design thinking is all about really taking that UI experience design and really flowing that into the design of software and the delivery of software. So if you think about design thinking might be, how does software get updated? How does it get updated in a way that's not disruptive to the end customer? Maybe it's happening in the background and it flips over immediately when there's been a lack of use on a smartphone or something like that. That's a tiny example of design thinking. So I think you mentioned, Jane, empathy as a skill, something around that. That's really embodying what's important to understand. Who's using the software? What are they doing? What are they trying to accomplish? And how do you think about the whole software, but think about a system and how it works for them?
Right. Very interesting. Okay, and so for practical approaches then for team upskilling, I guess a good place to start is knowing where you are. What are some ways maybe that we can assess performance? What are the KPIs that we're looking for that? And Ellen, I see you nodding your head. If you have an answer, I'm happy to have you chime in.
Yeah, I was just kind of going back to the original question, and maybe I'll dive into that. This is such uncharted and unprecedented territory coming from an HR professional, especially navigating in a lot of unknowns. And I'll tell you, from a small to mid-sized company, a lot of what we're doing right now is, upskill really is the strategy from a talent strategy perspective, right? We want to make sure that we retain everybody and that there's good levels of engagement during a pandemic. So that talk about the human element of what folks are facing on a personal level, and then we're also trying to just make sure that that there's productivity gained and that we're looking out for everyone's health and safety, while at the same time trying to keep productivity as normal as possible. So it's really hard to talk about future state. I'd say at any time it's super important to just continue. To me, it's a continuous process. It's a month over month, week over week, quarter over quarter, just making sure that, whether it's a KPI, whether it's an OKR, whether it's a goal and objective, just making sure that whether you are an individual contributor or whether you are a manager, it's just super important to just be aligned to the business strategy and showing flexibility in that any given time, we're going to have to pivot, right, based on where we are as a company. So I think we can talk about different KPIs, and I think every company is going to have their own measurement or their own philosophy around that. But I know that I've always been a big fan of pivoting and just making sure that any given time there's a reality check with what the business objectives are and showing flexibility there.
Lovely. All right. Very interesting. And so if we're thinking about these practical approaches to team upskilling and we're figuring out how do we measure it, where do we invest? Like, what are the things that we should be investing in? I don't know, Jeffrey, do you want to make some comments on what you're seeing as far as what people are looking for from a skills perspective? I know Robert Half is a very large recruiting firm, so you must deal with lots of hiring managers as well as people looking for jobs. So what are their tips?
I think there's, this whole concept of upskilling and the hybrid teams and things, both individually and collectively, we have to challenge our paradigms and our definitions. Most people hire developers, or they hire a database engineer, or they hire a particular skill set. It's harder to hire that E-shaped or T-shaped resource, right? So I think it's always this concept of, if I hire a developer, how do I give them innovation skills and team skills and presenting skills and create that, right? So I think it's a continued challenge for us. I think the good part to me is we're starting to recognize the need, and I think over time we're going to have to update both our hiring and our quote training capabilities to reflect that, right? Because we still traditionally hire and train to the I part of the equation, not
right.
to either the T or the E. And I think that's a real challenge for all of us. We recognize it. I think one of the things, in my view, of the DevOps industry is done, it recognizes the output of the value of what it brings, but it's slower to evolve the hiring and training things that are part of the entire equation.
Yeah, I mean, look, you get to round 3 of the NFL draft, you're not hiring for positions. You're hiring for the best athlete that's out there. And that's what we need to do when we hire. It's not like, oh, I need somebody that knows Python and Docker containers. Okay. No, you need somebody that can solve problems, that can understand the challenges the business is having and align that to the technical needs and the reality that the company has. If you find that person and they don't know Python or they don't know Go or whatever, fine. Figure out how to train them, peel off some money and send them to an online class or something like that. You just need to hire the best person. Hire the best person that can do the job and is clever. And right now is the time to start focusing on those kind of hires as opposed to somebody that just fits this mold. Because guess what? 6 months to a year, 18 months, that mold's going to change.
Yeah.
And I think just to add back, if I could real quick, Sam, your next slide, which I know you're going back and forth a little bit, this idea of tribal knowledge. I think this really becomes, we think we're one way, but we're really a different way. And so we think we're a high performing team that's doing DevOps, but yet what we are is a collection of individual units that don't work together, that have different views and don't work. So the really top organizations start to break that down. They start to get rid of the tribal silo, the challenges Robert just highlighted.
Yep. And Russell, I'm sorry, I want to get the audience's perspective in here. Russell was talking, he's saying +1 on the T&E shaped need. He says DevOps is a spectrum and the contributors need far more than specialization to affect full solutions. Specialization is too expensive a proposition anymore with the expansive options and tools in the chain, which I guess, Robert, is sort of what you were talking about. You have to make sure that people can adapt to the new tools, the new reality. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in. And I'm sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mitch. No, please go ahead. Go ahead, Mitch.
I was just going to jump in and, I think whatever the new normal will be, it's not going to be normal. So it's not going to be familiar. So I think that the thing that's important for us, this is a great time for DevOps and for all the investment that we've made in this capability to shine. Businesses need to be able to be very reactive. You talk about a disruption that wasn't planned. This is a disruption. So from a software development delivery organization, to what Robert said, hire the best player, also hire the best player who has demonstrated flexibility and ability to learn things fast. I would challenge the norm, and Alan, I appreciate your perspective on this, that really it's not about OKRs and measurements of individuals. It's about managers getting measured on the growth of their people. So what are your people capable of doing 6 months from now that they were before? That's the real value. Everything is an individual kind of plan, if you will, of where someone needs to grow into. But I think that's how to look at it, is really challenge your managers to grow their people, not just challenge people to grow themselves.
Yeah, those managers, they can't hire people that look like them. Because that's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, all right? They need to start looking for other things. And we need to start looking in different places for the best talent. Don't say, I need somebody with, 4-year CS degree. I don't have one. I'm a freaking CTO. It's like, that is not an indicator that you can solve problems.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant quote. We need to put that in our follow-up materials. You don't have to be a computer scientist. I'm a CTO and I don't have one. That's brilliant.
I think one of the most important things to hire for is curiosity. I think I've said, Robert and everybody really, I agree completely. I think I don't hire people for, do you know language X, Y, or Z? If you do, great. But really what I want to hire you for is, if I throw something new at you, can you figure it out quickly, right? And are you going to do that with fire in your eyes and really enjoy doing that? Those are the people that are really, truly, truly valuable. As I like to say, ignorance is curable, stupidity is not. So it's okay to hire ignorant people as long as they're curious and willing to go out and learn and kind of dig into things. And you quickly, when you work with people, you start to realize the people that are kind of comfortable in their pen and don't want to stray too much out of there. And if they're productive, that's great. but the true rock stars are going to be the ones that are like, I wonder why that happened, or I wonder why it's like that, and start to dig into things, because those are the scientists and the engineers, kind of at heart that you want. And I think, we're kind of in a real world global, this is not a simulation, throw out the status quo for at least the foreseeable future in terms of personal interaction and day-to-day activities. And that's absolutely throwing us for a loop. I mean, it's a little bit, like, I have a friend who always talked about, it's not your backup strategy that's important, it's your restore strategy that's important. You could be backing up everything to your heart's content. If you never try to restore that data and see if it actually works and is there, you're hosed, right? So I think this is a time when we're discovering those kind of weak places where we spent a lot of time thinking maybe about our backup strategy and not a whole lot of time thinking about what our recovery strategy is. So, some of these lessons will be learned very hard. A lot of companies will cease to exist. This is an existential threat for, pretty much name any industry, and there's going to be a huge amount of outcome out of this. But we will get back to close to normal, sooner or later. I mean, I don't want to be too sort of, glib about this, but if you go back and think about, you think about 9/11 and how things changed after that, a lot of things went back to the same. Flying didn't, so that was a permanent change in terms of security and so on during flying. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the permanent changes are going forward. I think most things, eventually will come back to normal. But I think it's also a really good, kind of wake up call to that whole notion of, look, you have to assume that every once in a while there's going to be this, what we call the black swan, the thing that isn't supposed to happen that does. If you're lucky, it's a once in a century kind of event. Depending on where you are in the world, it could be a once a decade kind of event with war and famine and those sorts of things.
But Talib Nassim, I believe, is the author of that book. His point was that they are accelerating in frequency. So they're going to happen more and more, and our poor, millennials and Gen Z are going through a lot of them, and they're going to happen more and more. So the new normal is that there is no new normal, and make peace with it, and get flexible. You got to do that. DevOps is the business yoga, so get flexible.
Nice.
I like the yoga piece. I agree with actually all the points that everyone else has made. What I like, the way I like to think about it is, you're right. You want to hire for the skills that are needed in the future. And sometimes you might not even know what that is. You might know 50, 60% of what that might look like. I know that stopping long enough to make sure that you have a good understanding of what are those cultural attributes that you would want, not just an individual, to your point, but like the collective team. So I know that on the one slide when you were talking about the human skills, and I have to check myself, I keep saying soft skills, but on the human skills, collaboration, I know I get eye rolls like, oh my gosh, that sounds like such an HR term, but truly the ability to collaborate, like I've seen people fall down and have, they are not able to demonstrate those skills, right? So being really crystal clear on what are those cultural attributes that you want as a team, because that is harder to train. That's sort of embedded in someone, a lot harder to train, but you can upskill in different technical areas down the road. So it's an investment in the people and the environment and the culture that you're trying to build. And the rest you can, again, pivot along the way and train folks when the time comes.
But, Ellen, if I can jump in, everything that you guys are saying is absolutely right on, but it also, to me, kind of points to, we need to upskill our leaders and our HR folks, right? To think differently, to hire differently, to measure differently. And if we assume that's going to happen organically, it's kind of the same way of assuming that the practitioners are going to upskill organically as well. So I think there also has to be some resources that help support, those who are in talent acquisition, those who are in hiring roles, those that measure performance, measure success. While we're talking about upskilling, from a very detailed perspective, I think, maybe next year we also look at okay, from a leadership perspective, what kind of leadership skills do we need to focus on so that we can move into whatever the new normal is, or at least into this decade?
100%.
Yeah, we have some really great comments from the audience with a question from John. But before we get to the question, Russell has a comment here. There's not a lot of talent with breadth. Most talent is specialized while they're growing into breadth. So you'll still need to decide to have capacity and grow people, or wait for the perfect hire, and good luck with that. So finding as much skills you can with aptitude and attitude you can work with, which I think aptitude and attitude are two really good things. So John has asked a question that I think is really a good one, and I'll put it to the folks here. Are companies really willing to spend money on their people, or just expect people to advance their own skills or make it up as they go along? And so Ellen, I'm going to pitch that one to you, because I'm sure that you have an opinion on it. And then, and I'm not trying to trap you in this one, because I think we have an awesome, I mean, it's awesome at Cloudbees. I love the amount of things that they have available for our employees. So Ellen, what are your thoughts?
So I mean, I'm probably going to be the most biased out of everyone here, and that I do think, you know, yes, it's absolutely important. And from there's two different ways of looking at it. One is sort of a top-down view, a philosophical view on it, right? I think that's all going to depend on the company. I've worked for 100-person companies, and I've worked for 12,000-person companies. And in both, I've been very, very fortunate that I've worked with companies that, even if it was not deep pockets, it was still embedded into the overall sort of, you know, talent cycle of, we'll put money aside so that you can figure out what you need. My personal opinion is that sometimes there's a disconnect between what do I personally own versus like what does my management team want me to do. I think sometimes there's a disconnect between sort of, I own my career, I want to work on my own professional development, which that to me should be the philosophy, right? And sometimes I think we get trapped into, I'm being held back in some way versus, you know, having support from a management team. So so I'm obviously a big proponent for it. I know that I try to, just to give you some real life examples, I make sure I set money aside from a budgeting perspective, make sure that we find opportunities for that. Knowledge sharing is important. I will say, one area that I'm pretty passionate about is that we talk about training in the context even of upskilling. Sometimes I feel like there's a missed opportunity to miss out on just project work or just on the job type of natural training that happens, because we're so focused on the formal. So again, it's obviously super, super important. It's important to set aside not just the budget, but the effort, but to truly own it as an individual. It doesn't matter what level that you're at.
Nice. Anybody else? Jeff, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I think as I was thinking, you know, many moons ago, like 6 weeks ago, I traveled around the country and met with, you know, clients and individuals in markets. But the idea of do companies want to spend money? I think they have to figure out the value proposition. But, you know, I think it's really important to not only do the formal training, as we just said, but that idea of giving them the opportunity to practice, to get that experience, whether that's, you know, in a practice environment or even in a real. How do you track what the work they're doing while they're a specialist in one area is developing them and giving them experience in something else? But for many years, I would say the person that owns that, we as leaders and organizations own that as a responsibility from an investment in a program. But the individual has to invest in themselves in that, whether that's, you know, during the day or after the day, during the work, after the work, right? Because that's a real tough balance, but it requires both.
Right. Yeah, and that's that curiosity that you talked about. There's a great saying, I don't know exactly what it is, I'm probably going to butcher it, but you know, a CEO and a CFO are talking, and the CFO says, do we really need to spend this money to train our people? What if we train them and they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay?
Ha!
Right?
Yeah, I like that.
We had to get, you know, we had to get certified for AWS for us to move to a next level in our partnership with them. And so we did a call to the company and said, hey, who's down? Who wants to do nights and weekends and work on this stuff? We'll pick up the tab. whatever class, books, whatever you want to do, however many times you want to take the test, we got it. And so we had a lot of volunteers, and they all got certified. And there was a couple of folks who were just drinking from the fire hose, that were just had so much stuff going on at work. They were like, man, I really want to get this certification done. I just don't have time for it. And what we did was we put it on their story points. All right, so put it in Jira, created a ticket. You're going to study and work on this. Yeah. So obviously, being AWS certified is very important to us at Datical. But it was also an opportunity to share with that person, hey, we take your advancement seriously, all right? And we're willing to put that in front of other things that need to happen for the business, because that's for the business. And John, if you're still listening, man, if your company is saying, hey, isn't that your deal to get certified? Isn't that your problem to learn and advance your career? You're working at the wrong company. And it sounds like from Ellen, they've got lots of open positions at CloudBees. and so I reach out to her. We got them at Datical too. But, yeah,
So
but
I think it's a competitive thing. I mean, I think at some point, people are going to choose where they choose where they want to work to a large degree, especially in this industry. And I think it's a competitive disadvantage if you don't make time. And I think time is almost more important than money for a lot of places, obviously not everywhere, but that idea of, fine, we'll count it as story points and we'll just do it during the day, make it part of your job. I mean, I think if you don't do those kinds of things, the signal that you're sending to your people is, we don't think that's important. We don't think your growth is important. And that's a signal. And I don't think that's a signal you want to send if you want to be successful.
So I'd like to challenge the premise of the question, with all due respect to John. I don't think it's a bit of a false dichotomy of, is it one or the other? Think of it this way. You own your own career. If you were your own business, your career is your business. And of course, you're going to invest in yourself and develop. You're going to take that curiosity and use it to motivate you, or whatever does motivate you to continuously learn. It's one of the best advice I got from my professor. Was one of my professors in college. He said, in 6 months, everything you learned here will be out of date, so you better keep up.
Yes.
The other is, of course, you want to work for an organization.
Well, stone tablet technology was really advancing rapidly back then.
Yeah, exactly. The other is, you want to work for an organization that, yes, supports it. And I think I really like what Robert and others said, is it's not just budget. That's actually not really the issue. It's time, and it's support from management who create space, like you talked about, Rob, is doing it through a Kanban board or whatever that, slowing it down and say, look, I need you to take a break, go take some time and go work on that objective, right, to go learn. And so that's really the role of the manager, is to create the space and the opportunity for it. It's your job you own what you want to learn and where you want to go in your career. That's how I look at it. So it's both.
All right. So John, hopefully you got your question answered, and it's time to, dump the zero and get with the hero. Go with a company that does care.
There you go. or if you're the person who needs to invest, then you should be investing. So let me ask this question. It's one of the questions here. What impact has remote work and business disruption had on the whole idea of knowledge sharing? Right? The fact that people aren't in the same space anymore. I saw an interesting thing, I think it was on my kid's TikTok yesterday, about how process memory dies pretty quickly after people don't do things anymore. And it was a couple of very young kids trying to use an old rotary telephone. And they were given 4 minutes to figure out how to dial a phone number. And they couldn't figure it out, right? Rotary telephones aren't that old. But they were
they are
foreign to them.
You may have to explain what a rotary telephone is, Sam.
To the audience, right? Yeah.
Telephone? What is that? A certain kind of phone? I don't know what that is.
Some new smartphones coming out.
It's a Wankel rotary telephone. It's an engine that was designed by the Mazda company way back when. I'm just kidding.
Well, Sam, looking at it from the upside, the current situation kind of pushes us, maybe forces some of us into using more collaborative tools, since we're not down the hall from each other. And email, if I can use the word, sucks for collaboration. If I could get rid of email, I would. But what I see happening is people are now really figuring out or starting to get into like using Slack or Team or something that they've maybe been kind of a lurker or just peripherally involved, and now that's where the communications is happening. So hopefully that's one good byproduct that could come out of this is we can work anywhere and we can still collaborate, and it can be digitally as well as in person.
Yeah, it's odd for us at CloudBees, and Ellen can chime in on this as well, because we are a remote company already. Almost everybody works out of their homes or travels or those sorts of things. Not everybody, but a lot of people. So, I mean, from my perspective, the big difference here, and I count myself as very fortunate in this aspect, is I'm not traveling. Other than that, my work experience is pretty much exactly the same as it's been before, which is it all happens, you know, over Zoom and GoToMeeting and Hangouts and those sorts of things. So I felt, you know, it's been a fairly smooth transition as far as that aspect of it is concerned. Obviously, there's bigger picture issues that you have to be concerned about in these things. But it's been kind of interesting to see that we didn't slow down. We didn't sort of drop much of a step, at least kind of at the individual level, because this is how we operate day to day. Not everybody is like that. Not everybody is kind of fortunate in that sense. They have to be physically present somewhere to do their job. And I would imagine this is a scenario where you find lots of little nooks and crannies where you've got process that isn't sort of remotable, if you will, if I can invent the word. So probably the first few weeks of this, people are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to do the Rube Goldberg machine to make sure that they can make things work still.
Right. Well, this was the question that had come up earlier, and I'm trying to find it in the question log, but it was really all about that whole process work and the statistics, Jane, that you had put up, basically indicating that CI/CD and the process there was starting to become much more critical and much more important. The question was really around sort of the idea of designing process, and is that really that critical of a skill, or is implementing the process that critical part of the skill? And I think both of them are pretty critical. But in today's environment, there's probably a lot of rework of process that's going on, because I used to be able to just walk down the hall and have this thing happen. And now it's this whole ordeal because the team is, you know, I can't access them and it's asynchronous and all this other stuff. Jeffrey.
I think to that, though, I think there's the assumption that when people were together, that they collaborated. I think the good people that were good collaborators when they were together will be good collaborators when they're remote and digital. And I think the gap is figuring out how to drive, you know, we're going to change how we collaborate right now. It's going to seem like everybody's doing something great, but we may go right back to the non-collaborative world, just in a digital sense. So I think there's a caution there.
And I think that
sorry, go ahead.
When you look at collaboration, and I'm going to channel Evelyn for just a minute, because you know, it's a little Cyrano de Bergerac here, but when we look at collaboration, the other thing we're going to learn a lot about is vocabulary. So we're going to learn about the fact that yes, we want to online collaborate, but we're not in the same time zone. We don't speak the same native languages. We don't speak the same technical languages, right? So we're having to overcome perhaps some things that we never had to overcome before, because, you know, to Mitch's point, we used email, right? And we were asynchronous in a lot of ways. And now we have to work harder at process, right? Which means we have to be more inclusive. We have to be better collaborators. And I think to the point of, if you weren't a good collaborator before, are you a good collaborator now? I don't know. But I think it also illustrates the fact that some of the barriers to good collaboration always existed, but I think they're more apparent now. And again, a lot of it's really, really grounded in how we speak, right? Whether it's a time zone issue, it's a native language issue, but I would also challenge us that now is a good time for us to cross-pollinate our skills, because sometimes that's also a barrier to process.
And I think we should make the assumption that we're going to be returning to the office. At least we certainly won't all at once. It may happen in phases, and frankly, many companies may stay distributed if they weren't already before. We also, you know, we may have reoccurrence of the virus and things like that. So maybe the way to think about this is design everything as a distributed process. Just start there. So it can be distributed whether it is or will be in the future, because I'll bet the kind of elasticity and the flexibility of agility of the organization is going to require you to think about, okay, we got to use this team that's not sitting down the hall, they're sitting across the globe. How do we do that? Well, if you're already thinking distributed, it's much easier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you need
the
resilience, not
1918 epidemic went around the world, I think, 3 times over the course of 2 years. So, we can expect that this is not going to go away completely anytime soon. And I think, there's definitely that. I mean, it's interesting, like the internet is working pretty well, right? That was built to be distributed, built to be, route around failures and those sorts of things. And by and large, at least, where I am, which oddly enough in Silicon Valley, the internet sometimes sucks. It's been holding up really well. So it's kind of done its job there, which is lucky.
Look, pain is instructive. All right,
Right.
that's the whole DevOps thing.
That's
So
right.
when it falls apart, fix it,
Yeah.
and then find the next thing and fix that
Iterate.
and keep going.
Try and iterate. Yeah.
This idea that we're gonna go into a conference room and put Post-it notes up to solve this problem. It's like, nah, look, we're having a problem with collaboration. Let's fix it. All right, we're having a problem with this. We're having a problem keeping the servers up. Whatever it is, you're having a problem. Go and solve it, and then go solve the next one. It's not hard. Just do it. You don't need a blue ribbon committee.
All can help the astronauts fix stuff from a room in wherever, and they're without any extra stuff. They're already up in space. They got everything that they have with them. They can't stop and get extra stuff.
Hey, you know that scene in Iron Man, first Iron Man, all right, where the Obadiah Stane goes to the engineer and says, hey, what's going on with the arc reactor? You got to shrink it down. And he said, Tony Stark was able to do this in a cave in Afghanistan. And the guy said, well, I'm not Tony Stark. And what Obadiah Stane should have done is, well, what kind of training and development do you need to become Tony Stark? But Obadiah was a shitty manager, and he got what was coming to him.
That's right. Exactly. I love that you brought that all back around. So there's a question from Laurent that I think Rob wants to answer. How does remote work resonate with companies? And Datical is an example. You were, I guess, a company that wanted to have everybody in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So how is COVID now affecting you, and how are you helping to make sure that those folks feel like they're being included and empowered and enabled?
Well, yeah, we put a lot of value on collaboration in person, and we made sure to put our office centrally located to where all the Daticals were. We actually put it on a map, put all their addresses in, and got a center point and said that's where the office is. And
we did that too back at Electric Cloud, by the way. It worked pretty well.
And so, but now we can't do that. And so what we did was we just said, okay, we know this is coming, and we started working from home to test it out before we got the stay-at-home order. And we paid attention to KPIs. We looked at KPIs for sales, so calls made, opportunity creation, all that stuff. We looked at dev, story points, how are things progressing in the sprint? And guess what? All up and to the right. And so we were like, well, so I think the in-person collaboration was a little overrated, or our folks are great and they figured out a way around it. Regardless, it's unnecessary.
I think what you need to, you have to be a little bit careful there though, because do that measurement again in a month or 2 months, because there's that, and maybe this is apocryphal and I'm spouting BS, but there was that study they did decades ago about how they started piping in music to offices and productivity went up, but then it plateaued and went back down. And then they turned off the music and productivity went up, plateaued, and then went back down. So sometimes stimulus causes change, but then when you get used to the stimulus, that response is gone. So measure again.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a DevOps company, so we look at KPIs, and that is it. We look at the 4 horsemen of KPIs from Dr. Forrestgren, and then our own that we throw in. But yeah, we watch this stuff like a hawk. And you know what? If the data says that we had the wrong idea, they had the wrong idea, and we move on to the next thing. And so,
by the way,
Yeah, I wanted to share a little bit of data because we're doing some research as Accelerated Strategies is in this area. And this is from some polls that were just recently taken. One of the questions was, do you want to work from home? How much do you want to work from home now that you're doing this because of COVID versus returning to the office? Now this is on DevOps.com, and so it's a very DevOps-centric audience, but that's of course who we're talking a lot to.
Our people.
Only
Yeah.
15% said that they preferred to return to the office, and 60%, 60, said they preferred to work at home 3 days a week up to permanently. And we're now collecting some data about why, and it isn't finished yet, but one of the reasons is the commute. 70% plus said getting that 30 minutes, hour, 2 hours back, what a huge gift. That was their number one reason overwhelmingly, followed by safety.
The ones that don't probably have a lot of children. You can't lock your doors.
So sorry to interrupt.
That's actually really, it's interesting. And, you know, it actually got me thinking that within our group, Anders is right, we're primarily remote first. So we were very fortunate in that we had like culturally infrastructure. For us, it was just a business as usual. And in some cases, you know, if you're in an office, you may have taken a chair home, but that was about it. However, what was interesting is for about 30% of the people that were going into an office, I know over time I've gotten complaints from people saying because we've had a blended approach, even if people were going into the office 3 days a week, you know, when you get on just different calls or when you're collaborating, you're having to deal with some audiences that are home and some that are in an office. It's been interesting. I've been getting just more feedback lately to say it's interesting. We're all in the same boat. And oh, by the way, we might have cats and dogs and kids, partners, spouses, whatever, like everybody's sort of in the same place. So it's actually helped the level of collaboration because then you're not the person that's trying to chime in on a call. You're the one person at home and you've got, you know, 4 people in the office. It sort of put everyone on the same you know, playing field and kind of an appreciation for both being in an office and then also working remotely.
That's an interesting point because calls where everybody is remote tend to go a lot more smoothly than calls where there's you know 10 people in a room and then 4 people remotely in different locations. Right?
You're not a second-class citizen.
Yeah. So that's been kind of interesting.
Work hours. Are you seeing different work hours? Because that's interesting to me too. So, for example, people that have children at home, you know, the daytime distractions may be different, and they may be accomplishing not calls, obviously, but other work. You know, I've worked from home like Anders for a long time, and so I'm pretty well set up. My Monday through Friday is pretty familiar. Saturday and Sunday are a little bit interesting, but you know, the daytime work is thing. And working from home, you do end up working perhaps different hours, maybe even longer hours, which again, in this situation is interesting. But are you finding that people are working, you know, keeping their normal structure of the difference between a work day and perhaps just getting work done? Is that changing?
Yes. Well, we've been intentional in that area, and depending on which team, and actually Anders and Sam can probably even speak to that, but depending on which teams and depending on if you are, you know, part of a critical like project launch or some sort of like sprint, then there might be some flexibility there. But certainly the way that our managers are working within the teams, we're very flexible anyway as a company. So it's not uncommon, you know, for someone to even maybe get on Slack at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. No one's really checking on, oh my gosh, are they on? It's more so they're probably going to work longer hours. Maybe in the morning they're taking care of the kids, or you know, so the flexibility piece and the flexing within the time, absolutely. That's
I've worked at a lot of companies, and CloudBees is definitely one where I feel the most open, and especially with the COVID thing happening, I'm very, very transparent. My calendar is totally open to people. They can see all my random, like, family time, do homework with kids, whatever. Because guess what? That's happening, and lying about it or trying to obfuscate it is not going to help anything. There's one more question that I want to pose to the group here. We only have 6 more minutes left. This time has just flown by, and I've said it in the chat, but I'll say it again verbally. I love all the questions and the engagement. I'm hoping this is interesting to the audience. We're going to be doing this every month. We are doing another one of these exact same topic in Europe with a bit more of a Europe slant. So if you have European colleagues, make sure that they join us there. The question here, it lines up with this slide, and it's from Jim. He says, I'm surprised that the business skills was so low. And he was referring, this is an old question, he was referring to your presentation, Jane. How does an Agile team or a DevOps team not need to know business connectivity, interrelationships, integration needs in all that they do? So when you're upskilling and you're trying to upskill between those gaps, why was that number, why do you think that that number was as low as it was? And what can be done to help the Dev and Ops teams understand more and get more alignment with the business as part of this upskilling? And so Jane, I'll have you start.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, because I actually wanted to talk about that. It wasn't low because you shouldn't know the business strategy or you shouldn't know the interoperability with other business units or other teams. It was, and again, Evelyn, I know is listening. It was really intended, like, do you need to understand the healthcare industry? Do you need to understand manufacturing? Do you need to understand? So it really was, I think, as much a recognition of the vertical skills. Can you take your skills across multiple vertical markets? Absolutely. Again, you know, I can't support it with the data, but absolutely, in a time where customer experience is essential, right? Empathy with your customers, empathy with your colleagues, you know, is so critical.
Yeah.
I don't think that number represents that you shouldn't have business skills within the operations of your own business. But is it necessary for you to you know, have a healthcare background to work in a healthcare industry, or is it necessary for you to have that vertical market? I think that was, you know, that's absolutely there.
And that customer experience piece you talk about, Sean has been screaming about that in the chat the whole time, which is amazing, right? I mean, that is really, that matters, right? And you're trying to upskill people. Anders says this all the time. People don't want to be transformed. That sounds kind of invasive.
Yeah. Sounds Kafkaesque.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that, Anders?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where I've always been a big proponent of, and I'll speak sort of to the dev side a little bit, get developers out of their cubicles, out of their pens, talking to customers, talking to support, talking to sales, talking to marketing. Understand, you don't have to understand all the details of everything, but I also make sort of I draw a distinction between sympathy and empathy. And I think most of the time, you know, with apologies, when we say empathy, we mean sympathy, right? Empathy, you can really only develop if you've been in that position. I've never broken a bone, you know, knock on whatever my desk is made out of. So I can't really empathize with somebody who's broken their arm, but I can sympathize, right? And I think by getting people out in the field who aren't normally there, or talking to their peers in marketing, or talking to their peers in support or HR or finance or any of the other functions in the company, then you build actual empathy, right? Because now you've sat there and you've taken a support call and you've realized how difficult it is to sort of figure out what's going on when you can't see what's happening on the other side of the screen. And you're having to sort of play a game of literally telephone sometimes to figure out what's going on. That builds empathy for, okay, well, I have to make my product diagnosable. I have to make my product, you know, I have to be able to do forensics remotely, and, you know, all of those sorts of things. So I think that that to me is part of the T and the E and all of those things is to put yourself a little bit more in other people's shoes. I think that makes you a better engineer. I think it makes you a better person, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yep. There was a question, very first question we got from Andre, basically, developers are a special breed that's not always talkative, and collaboration is not always on their to-do list. I'm struggling to get input and participation from them in our community practice, especially harder now with the country in lockdown. Any tips or guidance? Tricky, right? How do you get them to be more engaged, and how do you build that empathy? Well, you can't send them on the road now with on the emergency visits to the customers for them to break bread.
Very true. Very true. Doesn't mean you can't interact with them, obviously, but so if there's resistance to those sorts of things, maybe you can't discount the fact that maybe you've just hired a bunch of people who aren't curious, right? I mean, that could be the situation as well. So, or they don't feel comfortable or safe culturally doing those sorts of things.
Right.
I mean, my answer to that would be, you know, you're not going to get that with that attitude. You know, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, it's
the meetings will continue until morale improves.
No,
That's
man,
right.
it's like, look, you got to empower those technical folks to get on the horn, get on a Zoom meeting with that prospect, with that customer, and find out. But this isn't just about devs. Go and learn the business. So there's look, I'm CTO, so I'm always looking for new tech that's cool that can help us out and help out our customers. And so found something, I think it has some legs, and we're going to start looking at it. But I reached out to a couple of the engineers that are going to get assigned to this. So engineering doesn't report to me. We got a VP of engineering, far better looking and much better skills than me, all right, to run this. And
how did you ever find that person? Oh my gosh.
Well, we are in Austin, there's a lot of us. But we were able to, I just called them and said on Zoom, or rather, I'm sorry, Slack call, hey man, this is coming. Let me tell you why. Let me give you, I'm not going to talk about the tech. I'm going to talk about the business reasons behind it and to share it with them. It was a 3-minute call. And now they're off to the races. They know why we're doing it, and then they can go figure it out. But it's on management to figure this stuff out. They've got to bring those folks in. You can't just say, oh, go figure it out, technical person.
Yeah, the business context is pretty huge. And again, we've had so many great questions. We didn't get to all the questions. We are out of time, and I'm getting pinged by folks that we are out of time. So I know this was an hour and a half of everyone's lives. I appreciate all of the audience joining and engaging so greatly on the chat and in the questions. I especially appreciate the panelists. Thank you all for joining us. And Jane, the research that you and Evelyn and the team have done is fantastic. Thank you very much for doing this for humanity. We all can get better together. It's an iterative process, and we're excited to be working to help bring this knowledge out to the folks. And speaking of that, we're going to be going unvirtual with the Software Delivery Leadership Foundation, and that's of course pending COVID-19, whether or not it's going to allow us to make it unvirtual. But we've got a leadership call for papers open. There's a special leadership track this year for the first time at DevOps World, the largest DevOps conference. It's been going on for a long time, and we're adding a leadership track to it. Accelerated Strategies, Mitch and the team at Accelerated Strategies are going to be chairing. They're an independent program chair for us to help solicit these calls for paper. So I implore you, if you have something that's interesting and you want to lead that conversation about something that the leaders are going to care about, please submit. Other than that, again, I want to thank everybody for joining, and we'll see you on May 4th. I think 2 o'clock Central Eastern European time.
Star Wars Day.
Central European time. And then next month we'll be doing another one on a more technical topic, which is going to be DevOps enterprise realities, right? What are the things that you need to do when you're looking at that? So thank you all for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Great panel.